Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. CBS News has learned Saudi Arabia is now ready to admit wrongdoing in the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi. The U.S.-based journalist went missing earlier this month after entering the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Initially, Saudi Arabia denied any involvement in his disappearance. But sources now say the country's government is preparing to report Khashoggi did, in fact, die in Saudi custody. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett has the latest.
President Trump emerged from a 20-minute call with Saudi King Salman and echoed the kingdom's denial of responsibility for the suspected death of U.S.-based journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
All I can do is report what he told me, and he told me in a very firm way that they had no knowledge of it.
Mr. Trump also raised this possible explanation.
It sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers.
That theory has not been embraced by Saudi leadership, who CBS News has learned is preparing to admit that Khashoggi's death was the result of an interrogation gone wrong. Khashoggi, a Washington Post contributor and outspoken critic of the Saudi regime, entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey on October 2nd, but has not been seen since. The Saudis have insisted he left on his own. At the president's direction, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo flew to Riyadh today for meetings with the royal family.
He's got instructions to find out what happened.
He may next head to Turkey, where investigators today searched the consulate, part of a Turkish-Saudi inquiry into the disappearance. The president told Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes his relationship to the kingdom might change if Khashoggi's death is confirmed.
We're going to get to the bottom of it, and there will be severe punishment.
But the president said he would not end a $110 billion Saudi arms deal.
Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, all these I don't want to hurt jobs.
Former acting CIA director and CBS contributor Michael Morell.
I think if the Saudis were involved in this, you will see some delay in arms sales, despite what the president says.
And Major joins us now. Major, can Saudi leadership explain their initial denial of any knowledge of this event? Is there a reason for the change in their position?
Well, what we're told, Elaine, through various sources, is the Saudi leadership, meaning the kingdom, the royal leadership of that Saudi kingdom, is prepared to make an explanation. That explanation hasn't happened yet. So until it does, we don't know what it is in all of its detail or lack of detail. But if what we are told turns out to be true, that the Saudis will say, you know, this was an effort to what we call, or what is known to be, a rendition, meaning an interrogation with a return of Jamal Khashoggi from the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, to Saudi Arabia. Some in the human rights community might call that rendition a kidnapping, extrajudicial procedure, meaning it has no basis in law. Even so, if the emerging Saudi explanation is that's all that they were trying to do, and trust me, human rights experts would say that's bad enough, but it was just an interrogation that went horribly wrong, and a deadly blunder was committed, and Jamal Khashoggi was killed because of some mistake that was made. If that is, in fact, what the Saudi kingdom admits to or confesses, then it will have to also explain, well, what about the week and a half or more of denials saying that there's nothing wrong here, that Khashoggi left of his own free will, and we don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, that was, we should remember and memorialize the initial Saudi reaction, that he's free. We don't know what happened, but then they would also suggest, if this explanation emerges that the Saudi kingdom did know, there's also reporting that someone within the Saudi government, after the initial interrogation, arrived at the consulate, possibly in a cleanup operation. Those things would have to be, at least at some level, accounted for and or explained. So there is much more yet to emerge about what the Saudis will say happened, what the Saudi government is willing to accept in terms of responsibility, and most importantly for the future of the Saudi-U.S. relationship, how much the Saudis will say either King Salman or Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman knew or did not know about this event.
So against that backdrop, Major, you have the president floating the idea of quote-unquote rogue killers. What does the president's wording there suggest about his approach to this diplomatic, very tense situation?
That he's willing, in so many words, to take the soundings from King Salman and repeat them publicly. And one would have to expect that King Salman, of advanced age, but nevertheless the King of Saudi Arabia, was prepared for this call with President Trump by the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And it's quite obvious in the American methodology that any U.S. president would be prepared by the State Department, the National Security Council, the CIA, for a call with the king. And immediately thereafter, the president begins to give voice as the commander-in-chief and someone whose administration has had a very tight relationship with the Saudi regime. Hey, this might be possible, creating this, if you will, aura of plausibility around something that had been completely wrapped in total mystery, a complete enigma, because no one was surfacing relevant information, neither the Turks nor the Saudis. And then the president has a conversation and then says, hey, you know, it might have been rogue killers, something that the U.S. intelligence community is not willing to say or even speculate about. The Saudis hadn't even floated that. But when you have the commander-in-chief of the most powerful nation in the world giving voice to that, that creates space for a different kind of conversation that very well may have been the president's intent.
So more broadly, Major, then how does that approach compare to how the president has handled previous conflicts with leaders of non-democratic nations like North Korea and Russia?
Well, I had someone who is very deeply involved, is no longer, in the U.S. intelligence community make a point to me today that's relevant to your question, Elaine, which is this. Yeah. If, in fact, the Saudis did accidentally, meaning without intent, kill a journalist in Turkey in their own consulate, then this would be 3 countries with which the president has a relationship in which the leadership has some responsibility for killing someone overseas: Saudi Arabia, Russia, and North Korea. And this former high-level member of the U.S. intelligence community suggested to me, what does that tell us about the signals the president sends somewhat routinely about his level of comfort with authoritarian regimes and his willingness to look in the other direction if other more important U.S. interests are followed or adhered to or reinforced by those regimes? That question, it seems, if in fact the Saudis become the 3rd country in which something like this has happened under their leadership or with some attachment to that leadership, the question answers itself.
So, Major, what about Turkey? How critical is Turkey's role in uncovering the truth here?
Well, obviously I don't know for sure, but those who I've spoken to and those others within our network have spoken to who are familiar with intelligence gathering throughout the Middle East and with some experience in Turkey have posited this theory that the Turks have some reservoir, some cache of information. It could be audio recordings because the Saudi consulate was surveilled by the Turks. There could be video evidence because the Turks might have been skilled enough, crafty enough to have video evidence within a Saudi consulate. There is a sense that the Turks are holding on to information and using that as leverage, not only with the United States government, with the Saudis. What they know and what they don't know, still for U.S. intelligence gatherers and analysts, remains somewhat of a mystery. The Turks, based on what they may or may not have, hold an evidentiary key to all this. The Saudis may also have evidence of their own, maybe that they don't want to release, maybe they're ashamed of releasing. But both countries know more about this than they have publicly disclosed. It was interesting, late last week, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, on the Hugh Hewitt radio show said there is nothing the U.S. government knows that it has not disclosed, suggesting at the highest levels that on Friday of last week, the U.S. was essentially blind about what happened in that consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. but it is safe to assume the Saudis know more than they have disclosed, and the Turks very well may know more than they have disclosed.
Much more to come, no doubt. Major Garrett at the White House for us. Major, thank you.
Sure.